Hello everyone, and here is an update of some modelled writing lessons, starting with task 1, maps. So a lot of you have asked, David, can you please upload more modelled writing lessons? And here we are. So I'm doing a few updates of these modelled writes. I think it is really useful. You can watch these videos more than once and just see me structure from beginning to end a full answer. Now, we haven't seen a full modelled write for maps yet, and although maps really are slightly less common, especially in comparison to bar charts and line charts, these types of things, there's still a small chance you could see them, a reasonably small chance. They're not that uncommon, I should say. So I'm going to show you a full report for a maps question. So let's take a look at this question. The maps show the development of an area in some land over a time span of 20 years. Summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so let's take a look at the topic sentence, that first sentence. The maps show. So the first thing I should say is that when it comes to a map question for IELTS Writing Task 1, there will almost always, I don't think I've seen one without, there'll be more than one map, which will help you compare. Sometimes you might say see 3 or even 4, and often these are for different times of the same area. So I'm assuming this question will have more than one map, it must do, and a time span of 20 years. So let's take a look at this map now. Okay, so we can see 1990 on the left and 2010 on the right. So let's take a look at the early map. 1990. So when you receive your questions, the first thing you want to do is to read the question, just like I did, then take a look at the visual information. Now, I might go a little bit slower, just so that you can see me analysing the data. But this is exactly what you will do too. And of course, then you'll write your plan. So first, read the question. Second, take a look at the visual information. Third, write your plan. So let's just take another look at this map. So 1990, I can see through the middle of the map we have a river. To the left we have a forest at the top, ancient structure, rare plants and animals, as well as some mountains sort of scattered around each corner of the map. To the right, to the east of the river, there's some farmlands, irrigated farms, and a village too. Okay, so sounds like quite a nice place. Let's take a look at map 2 in 2010. So we can still see the river runs in the same area, of course. Rivers always tend to stay in the same location. But there is a dam added, a hydroelectronic dam, which really cuts off half of the natural flow. These are all things we can describe. A lake has been added, a large lake where we can see sailing boats and fish, and the two mountains, of course, remain at the top. Below, to the south of this map, we can see electricity stations, both to the west and east of the river, and a new village has been added to the east of the river too. Now these mountains, these hills, seem to have been flattened somewhat. They have been destroyed in some respects, and so that we can have the electricity stations and villages added. And in terms of change, to the east of the lake, there is no longer an irrigated farmland and villages. We can see this changed into a hotel. So we have hotel here now. And that really is analysing the map as a whole. Of course, you won't need to do this completely before you start writing, but we need an understanding of the map's main features before we begin. So there you go. So that really is a big sort of look at this map. Now, the next thing I want to show you is super important for maps, and that is our vocabulary. So this is taken from IELTS Writing 7+, and this gives you some great language. I would bookmark this and practice using this language. It gives you some really focused vocabulary for 4 different types of changes on maps. So to the left we have additions, things added, structures added, and we can see some language there. Then we have removed, so things taken away. For example, in this map, we can say that the farmlands were demolished and replaced with a hotel. Here we have changed. So I could say converted, repurposed, redeveloped, all these really interesting pieces of language. And next we have expanded. So sometimes on certain maps, we can see that structures or features of a map are made bigger. And of course we can use this language here. So a super useful table, again taken from IELTS Writing 7+. I go a bit more into detail and give a load more examples in that course, but super useful. I would definitely practice using this during writing for maps. Okay, so it's time that we take a look at writing our plan. So back to our plan now. So we've looked at the question, we've analysed the visual information, and now it's time to write a quick plan. Okay, so let's consider our groupings. So group 1, our first detail paragraph. Now, there are probably a few ways you could approach this. With maps, I often like to look for a structure that separates the maps into 2. So the river that runs straight through these maps. So to make it easier to compare, you could say group 1, everything west, everything west of the river. And then you can easily compare. So basically both 1990 and 2010 go in the same group. So we could say everything west of the river. And then for group 2, we would say everything east of the river. And then of course I can compare, making comparisons where relevant, and I'm really scoring higher on my task achievement. However, the river doesn't actually stay the same for both maps, and maybe in 2010 it's easier to describe south of the river and north of the river, but that doesn't work in the same way for 1990. So what I will do is quite simply group by date. So I'm not going to be making so many comparisons in my first detail paragraph. I'm just going to describe the map. I'm going to report the main features. But that doesn't mean that in group 2 I can't compare. So when I discuss and report map 2010, I'll be able to compare it to the first map. So I'll be able to say, for example, the irrigated farms in 1990 have been replaced by a hotel in 2010. So that would be an example sentence for my detailed paragraph 2. So it seems like the easiest way to structure. The most important thing to think about when considering your grouping in a plan is what is the simplest way to do this. Don't overcomplicate it. Try and keep it really simple, because that will make your report easier to understand, and that's the main idea. We want to communicate and report everything in the simplest way. Okay, so that's great. And then the overview. So 1 or 2 things we can say about the big picture. We don't need to say specifically what happened, but maybe 1 sentence, 2 sentences to say the big picture. Now, to be honest, with maps, there is always a lot of change. Generally speaking, there always is a lot of difference between the 2 or 3 maps shown. So we can pretty much always write the first overview sentence the same. I'm just going to write lots of changes. You'll see this when I start writing and you can pretty much steal the exact sentence. So that's the first thing that I'll write. And then I'm going to say also, what else could I say? A big change is the lake added. So I could say one of the biggest changes is the lake added. But I'm also thinking that there's quite a lot of electricity and power generators added. So I'm going to say that there's one of the biggest changes was adding power generating systems. So I'm not going into too much detail, I'm just sort of giving a general idea of what happened in the map. So group 1, detail paragraph 1, 1990. Group 2, 2010, and I'll make a lot of comparisons. And of course the overview, lots of changes between, and these power generating systems, the dam and the electricity power stations here, that's a big change between the 20 years. Okay, so let's begin our writing. Okay, so the first thing, of course, we need to do is write our introduction structure, our introduction paragraph of one sentence. So let's take a look at the question. Again, the maps show the development of an area. Of course, we have this vocabulary here. So maps are maps. There's no need to change this. The maps illustrate. I love using that word in Task 1 reports. Illustrate. The maps illustrate the development, the changes of an area. Another word for area could be location. The maps illustrate the changes of the same area in some land, and of course capitalize for proper nouns. The maps illustrate the changes of the same area in some land over a 20-year period. So just writing it, paraphrasing this, over a time span of 20 years, over a 20-year period. Let's read this back. The maps illustrate the changes of the same area in some land over a 20-year period. Perfect. Okay, so we're on to our overview, and I'm going to use 2 sentences. Now, I just said that the first sentence for the overview in maps, you can pretty much copy this exactly for all questions. Overall, comma, we can see a lot of developments in this area over the time frame, over the given time shown. You can pretty much copy this. Of course, we could write it in slightly different ways, but this is pretty much usable for almost all maps. Overall, we can see a lot of developments in this area over the given time shown. Okay, and I also said I was going to mention that a lot of structures have been repurposed to generate electricity, and I can pretty much just write that. We can see a lot of structures have been repurposed over the 20 years to generate power and electricity. Okay, that looks good. As always, excuse any spelling mistakes. And that's great. So that's our overview. Now onto the main bulk of our writing. So we're going to begin group 1 with 1990. The first thing I'm going to mention is that the river runs straight through the middle. That's kind of the most important feature. In 1990, a river runs straight through the middle of the map from south to north. From south to north. Now I'm just going to think logically, how can I describe these features? So I'm just going to report the main features here. Report the main features, back to the question. So I'm not going to report this, then that, and that, and that. I'm just going to go through everything and say where it is in relation to each other. So comparing it to each other, each of the other structures. And that's just really this structure of how can I describe it, what's the easiest way. It just means that we're not going to miss anything, and it's a little bit easier to write logically about. To the northwest of the map, a forest area and mountain exist. Slightly south of this, an ancient structure was built and still stands. Still stands. A nice phrase there. Okay, so next on to the rare plants and animals. Just below, so I could say south again, but just below this, the examiner will understand I mean south, but generally do try and use, I just skipped back, sorry, generally do try and use these, the compass. Just below this, there are rare plants and animals. And further south again is... Now I'm looking at this and thinking I'm writing quite a lot already, so I might actually skip this feature here. I think I might just skip these things and just describe this so that I don't really go over that word count. I'm aiming for around 160, 180, 190 words, of course normally within the 20 minutes. That's enough. I've described the main features, especially the ones that have been labelled. Okay, so let's move on to the northeast. To the northeast, once again, a mountainous area exists, making comparison once again. South of this, we can see farmlands and a small village to the east of this. I'm saying small, it doesn't look particularly large, so I think that's okay. Generally, we wouldn't add too much detail that we don't know for sure, just report what you see. But it looks pretty small, so I think it's okay to say this. Now that looks good. We've got about 4 sentences in for group 1. Now we need to move on to group 2, which of course is this. And I'll make comparisons. It might be slightly longer than my group 1 paragraph here. Okay, by 2010, so I'm sort of ready to compare. By 2010, we can see many developments. That's almost an introduction to my second paragraph. We can see many developments. Now, what would be the easiest way to discuss and report this? Now, it seems really that this map is more split into north and south. So I think I'll just start with the south. I'm going to start at the bottom and make some comparisons and say how we have changed and developed. And then I'm going to describe this area after. So the river still runs from the south, but stops halfway up the map as a dam, as a hydroelectric dam has been, and then we can use this added, built, added, constructed. I like that. Has been constructed. Constructed. So I've done this top part. I've talked about the river. Now I need to say west of the river and east of the river. To the west of the river, just south of the dam, power stations have been erected. Just took a quick look at this table and used that word erected. To the east, okay, so now I'll describe this area. To the east, we can also see some power stations as well as a new village area that has been added. Perfect, added again. So I looked at this area here. I'm not going to say the mountain and the hilly areas have been removed. I'll more talk about what was removed or changed here. Okay, so let's just say north of the dam. To the north of the dam, a large lake was, let's say, built, was added, and we can see sailing boats and fish here too. Now all I really want to say to finish this off is just these two things here. How have the farmlands and villages changed? How were they converted? I think I will use, let's say, redeveloped, or let's actually say these were removed or pulled down, and then we can say converted. The area was converted. The farmlands and villages, so I'm making the comparisons here, were removed, and a hotel was developed on this area of the map. And that's it, really. I have just described everything in full here. So I've really given a good detailed report of this map. Now let's take a look at our word count too. Okay, so this stands at, I think, around, I did check, but I've kind of forgotten. It's about 220 words, which, to be honest, is a little bit over. But I think that it's okay if you are writing quality and it's that long. But I maybe described too many of the features. I'm glad I did not describe this area in my first paragraph, because that would have made it far too long. But yeah, 220, of course, we kind of aim for that 180, 190. And the reason I say this is just to make sure you're completing your writing in 20 minutes. But there we go. So that is a very strong report on Task 1 maps. Any questions, please do drop me a message.